Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Just Another G.I. Joe Show. And it's actually kind of a landmark episode. We were at number 20. I'm surprised we got past number 2, to be honest with you. So we are at number 20. I am your host, Mike. And just in time, Justin joined the show.
What's going on?
Hey, look at that guy.
Walked right in at the right time. How's it going, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Glad you can make it, man. For everyone who just joined in, we just went live with Justin, and y'all know Fred, that Joe Battle Lines guy here, there, and everywhere, and those two people in Glitch that don't watch him at all.
Hey, I'm putting together my mega blocks. Leave me alone.
Oh, Lord. Anyways, a couple of quick things I wanted to hammer out to a couple guys. For people who did the Kickstarter Modern Army Action Figures, a newspaper guidebook, started hitting the mailboxes. I got mine yesterday, which is a pretty cool little book where you can look back on how let's say the G.I. Joe hovercraft was $24.97 at one time. Figure, yeah. And then some. Let's see. Oh, here's a figure for $2.27. I mean, insanely prices. You're like, what the hell happened from the 80s to today?
It's called the economy, and it sucks.
Yes. Also, for y'all who don't know, I have talked about, we had Brad Sanders on the show back at JoeCon, and he reached out to me to start a fan page for him, which I started this week. So if y'all get a chance, definitely go check it out on Facebook. It is just under Brad Sanders. The picture is half Brad Sanders and half Big Lob. So be sure to join that, watch that, and we'll be doing some live feeds with Brad here in the near future. So, but enough about Brad. We're going to talk about our guest, Justin. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Just another day in paradise, living in Nerdville.
So for those of you who have been living under a rock, our guest tonight is Justin Bell. He is the owner, admin, review writer, webmaster, every hat possibly imaginable for generalsjoes.com. He was the primary reviewer content provider for Sigma 6 Central. He is the news desk guy for Yojo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess you could say that. Yeah.
Or whatever title you want to be, because it's primary, one of the holy trinity of Yojo right now. So we'll take that. Wow, that makes it sound like a religion, doesn't it?
It kind of is.
He was the PR director for Joe Declassified. In other words, Justin is everywhere in the freaking Joe community, and he's someone that I've known for far too long now.
I was gonna say, don't say how many years. It's gonna make us both old.
Jesus. I actually stumbled on Justin's reviews at some point in the late and Justin was pretty much the original Joe reviewer that I found online. So without that, let's just start talking with him a little bit. Again, Justin, everybody I think knows who you are, but they may not have met you or understand the full history, because it seems like there's a lot of newer fans out there now. So would you mind just kind of giving us a little bit of where the heck did General's Joe's come from?
Sure. Well, General's Joe's itself got its genesis with an old Angel Fire site, actually, believe it or not, in the mid to late 90s, closer to the late 90s. I was a hardcore collector of G.I. Joe since 1982, since it first came out, and never really stopped along the way. Obviously, there was a time when there wasn't stuff on retail shelves, and eBay didn't exist yet, so there was a period of time where it was a little bit more challenging to keep up with the collection, but I still managed to do that. And then somewhere in the late 90s, it was interesting. I was actually living down in Springfield, Massachusetts, while my wife was going to law school down there, and just by happenstance, I had started this Angel Fire site that I was hosting some of my custom figures on, because I'd been hanging out at a place called the Bivouac. That was one of my favorite online communities back then, now known as joecustoms.com. And their specialty was custom figures and stuff. So I kind of got reintroduced to G.I. Joe there, and through the Yojo Pit mailing list and things like that, and finally fired up an Angel Fire site to host my own customs. And that's really all I was doing there, was just custom figures. And then just by some stroke of luck, I swung by a Toys R Us, one day in the year 2000, and managed to be one of the first people in the country to find the first wave of the Real American Hero collection back in those days, which were those 2-packs that Toys R Us had those exclusives in 97 and 98. And then there was a break of a couple of years. And then in 2000, the Real American Hero collection came out. And I was the first one to find the figures, pretty much. So that kind of spurred me. A lot of people were asking, "Oh, what are they like? Tell us a little bit about them." So I did my first reviews in kind of the year 2000, and hosted them on that Angel Fire site. And it just kind of took off from there. Ever since I started posting those, people wanted to see more. So I, as the other new figures came out, I would post those reviews. And then it came to a point where it was obvious that Angel Fire wasn't going to cut it anymore, so I registered my own domain name. Yeah, I signed up with GoDaddy and registered my own domain name, and that was probably in the mid 2000s or early 2000s, maybe 2002, 2003, something like that, when I did that, and officially started, calling the site generalsjoes.com at that point. And then somewhere around 2008 or 2007 or 2008, I got the WordPress backend installed and actually started doing news and started doing even more reviews, and really started. And when I migrated to General's Joe's originally, that was kind of when the Dio Story stuff kicked off. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but yeah, I mean that's kind of where things were born, kind of that 98 through 2000, which was a really people now think that, oh, we're in this G.I. Joe dark ages. So yeah, it's a dark ages. We haven't seen retail stuff in a year. There might be a movie coming out. There's an ongoing comic. Yeah, those. Don't talk to me about dark ages if you're around in 99, or around in 96, 97, and then again in 99. I mean, that was truly, G.I. Joe might as well have not existed at all in those particular years. So
it's
that's kind of why
it's kind of like that now. They don't exist. I mean.
Well,
but I mean, there's still a comic you can buy, and there's still the rumors of possible movie franchise and stuff like that. And so, I mean, there's this little nugget of possibility there. I mean, back in those days,
there was nothing.
I mean, the internet was in its infancy, so you didn't really have that. You couldn't fly to Chattanooga and talk to Daryl DePriest, back, you could, but he wouldn't work for Hasbro at the time. But, so you didn't really have those inroads, and you couldn't really get any of that behind the scenes stuff. There was no Hasbro Pulse website. There was nothing like that. So, so it really, truly, as far as collectors were aware, G.I. Joe was just gone, until it wasn't. So, kind of fast forward, and it feels like to a certain degree, G.I. Joe is sort of gone. But you still got the Collectors Club, doing the figure subscription service. You've still got JoeCon coming up next year. You still have possible San Diego Comic-Con exclusives or HasCon exclusives. There's another one next year. So there's some stuff. There's the comic and everything. So there's at least some tenuous grasp of a G.I. Joe brand, even if it's not as strong as any of us would like it to be.
So, okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's kind of where General's Joe's came from, and it's kind of continued to evolve from there. It doesn't get updated as frequently these days as it has in the past, but it's certainly still kicking and not going anywhere.
And so, again, I kind of want to start with the reviews thing. I think the reviews have kind of been the gateway to General's Joe's for most people. You know, let's face it, a new figure comes out, and again, like you were saying, back in especially in the G.I. Joe versus in the Real American Hero Classics collection days. Because that's when I first stumbled on it. You were like, wait, what? Somebody posted in an obscure news group that this is out, and you're all scrambling for images because, kids, this is in the dark ages, kids, before social media.
The review pictures that I originally took for that first series might have even been, some of them might have been figures laid face down on a flatbed scanner and scanned. I think that was some of those first pictures. And some of the other ones were taken with a 1 megapixel digital camera that we got as a wedding gift back in those days too. So I kind of split it between those two. Yeah.
Oh, the compact flashcard days when those big.
Oh yes.
Oh look, I got 2 megs of storage.
Oh God.
This will never fill up. I'll have this forever.
Okay, so let me ask you. Okay, so you get, when did you realize that you were really going to become a GI Joe reviewer, that going out into a store and buying something new, you were no longer running home and opening it, but you're like, oh crap, I got to take the pictures, the package first. Yeah. When did that kick in for you? I know that's kind of a weird question, but
yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think it was kind of 2003, 2004, kind of the Spy Troops, Valor versus Venom era. Actually, a little bit before that, the G.I. Joe versus Cobra line was really tricky for me, because for a lot of people, removing the O-ring, getting those T-crotch figures, they're like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I tried to look at it, I got those figures in hand, and the raw G.I. Joe fan in me was like, get the shit out of here. Or I don't know if I can swear on this thing or not, so I apologize. But
Mike does all that.
Just the S-bomb. Just the S-bomb.
But yeah, I was like, get this out of here, this is garbage. But then the reviewer part of me was like, well, there's reasons for it. I should try to look at all angles and try not to be overly, seat in my pants. So I think that's kind of where it first started. And then it kind of spilled over into the New Sculpt era, where I had to face a lot of the same questions, like, Lady J's legs are longer than the whole entire rest of her body, twice over. I should mention that as a reviewer, but not get pissed off as a fan, and try to kind of make my opinion a little bit more objective. And I think that's kind of where I first started. People, call me an apologist and all this stuff. And really that's kind of the questions I would run into as a reviewer, is like, do I sit here and say, I love this figure because I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan and this is a fun figure to play with? Or do I look at the aesthetics, look at the sculpting, look at the technical acumen that it took to construct the figure, and base my reviews off of that?
Sure.
And I don't think I was ever really successful at one or the other, because depending on the figure, I would, go back and forth, because some figures I loved so much just as a fan, like, the Billy figure from the G.I. Joe Collectors Club figure subscription service. As a fan, I was dying to get that figure, and I loved that figure as a fan. Technically, it's not a great figure, but I gave it a pretty decent review just because it was a character I've been waiting for so long, and I was so excited to get it. So, I mean, it's you walk that line as a fan and as a reviewer, where you try to cover both bases, and sometimes you don't cover either of them especially well. But I do my best.
Well, and I remember when you made a conscious shift in your reviews to adding a rating scale.
Yeah.
And before, when you would write, you would always kind of break it down. Reviewers, you fall into a pattern, and you fall into a rhythm of, you're going to talk about this, you're going to talk about this. He is not fooling around with that mug, kids.
Like that? That thing is bigger than my head.
You fall. I thought my air dinger was bad, and Justin's over here like, "Bring me the tankard."
It's got meat in it. It's pure meat.
It's Viking roots. Anyway, so you fall into this rhythm in a review where you kind of have, a flow to the way you talk about things. When you added the rating scale, was that a way to kind of balance more the technical build side and the positives and the shortcomings with the woohoo, I got Billy!
That's kind of what it was about. And actually, it came about when I used to do a lot of work with JoeSightings.com, which unfortunately I don't believe is online anymore. But I actually did one of the admins of JoeSightings.com, an awesome guy named Ryan, who doesn't get nearly enough credit in the G.I. Joe community as he deserves. But he was helping me out with some reviews, and he reviewed those Valor versus Venom mechs, like the Defense mech and the one that came with Ghost Bear. I don't remember, Pulverizer, I think it was called. And he actually used a rating scale, and I think that was about the first time that rating scale appeared on General's Joe's. I was like, that's interesting. So I decided to kind of start using that in my own reviews. I'll be honest with you, in some ways I wish I never had. But in other ways, I'm kind of glad I did. I mean, the rating scale is so tricky, because just from a pure technical perspective, the construction and the build of the action figure from one year to another can be completely different. Like if you look at stuff we got in 2007 compared to stuff we got in 2011, I mean, of course, the 2011 stuff is going to blow it away, just because the skill set and the technology and the whatever was so much better 4 years later. Does that mean that looking back to 2008 to the version 2 Destro, the Iron Grenadiers Destro, that doesn't deserve as good a rating scale as a Pursuit of Cobra Snake Eyes? I don't know, because compared to other figures in 2007, that Destro is pretty damn good. But then you compare Snake Eyes to that Destro, and Snake Eyes looks like a whole other generation, but yet they both are between 4 and 5 stars. So I mean, it's so subjective. It's really tough to kind of look back on some of those old ratings and realize where, how they get developed. And I struggle with that every year, and it's getting to the point where I'm kind of picking nits as I purposefully look at last year's figures compared to this year's figures and say, okay, I liked this figure a lot, I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. And then I look back from last year, I'm like, oh, but wait, I only gave, I don't know, Leatherneck 4.25 stars, and this figure definitely is not better than Leatherneck, so it can't be 4.5 stars, so it's got to only be 4 stars. Oh, but then I gave this figure 4 stars. This figure is definitely better than that figure, but it's not as good as Leatherneck's. I mean, it gets crazy. So it's just to the point where, I give the ratings I feel like they deserve at the time, and if it doesn't necessarily jive with the star ratings that they got last year or the year before, I gonna kind of just have to roll with it a little bit and just again do the best I can.
Well,
give them all fives. Give them all
There you go.
Well, but that seems fair, because anytime you judge something, you're judging it at that time.
Exactly.
All reviews are based on your perception and your preferences at that moment. And as you said, you and I were tag teaming some of the latter 25th anniversary stuff. I mean, after a while, it was a slog to get through. And then Pursuit of Cobra came along a few years later, and man, something that you would have considered a 5-star 25th figure, you put it up against a Pursuit of Cobra figure. Yeah. And it's like, son, get out of here. You're not even worthy of being in the same.
There were Valor versus Venom figures, like the I think it was Cobra, maybe it was even a Spy Troops Cobra Commander. There was some version of Cobra Commander that came out in that new sculpt era that I looked at. I was like, this is the best Cobra Commander ever made. This is fantastic. Yeah. Anybody now who looks back in 2004 and 2005 at any of those figures is going to be hard pressed to say any of them is the best version of any of those particular characters. Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, it just depends on kind of what surrounds it at the time.
As a reviewer, do you, and you touched on this before, and again, I've known you, so you kind of know where I'm leading this, is, people have called you an apologist. Do you make an effort as a reviewer to not just go, oh my God, this is the worst piece of crap ever, death of the line? Do you make an effort to find the positive in everything you review, or is it a matter of, look, if something, because if something really is just not to your taste, I mean, how do you balance that?
I've been known to just trash something before. I don't do it often because, it's tough because we get so much insight into Hasbro, and we go to the conventions and we meet the people that make these toys. And you don't want to publish reviews that say, whoever sculpted his figure should be fired, ranting and raving because you met them 6 months ago and you're like, wow, that guy was pretty cool. I'm not going to call his work a piece of crap in this review. But at the same time, you want to be fair and you want to try to be as balanced as possible. So, but there are some figures there that there's a Pursuit of Cobra Storm Shadow. I think one of the ones with those like spring-loaded leg gimmicks that I kind of trashed. Yeah, I mean, there's been figures that I've given 1 star to before that I really, kind of uncorked on. But for the most part, you're right. I try to be fair because most of the reason when there are limitations to a figure, there are reasons for it. And, it doesn't necessarily make the figure any better or worse. But I mean, even back in the day, I mean, in 1982, would a reviewer have gotten the original Snake Eyes and said, this figure has no paint on it. It's a piece of crap. I hate it. Not realizing that Hasbro had used all their budget money on the paint apps for the other figures, so they just didn't have any left. And that's why Snake Eyes was all black. So, I mean, it goes back all the way to 1982 and before. I mean, there's reasons for many of these decisions that are made. So I try to look at it with a perspective that, yes, I didn't like this, but here's why they might have done it this way,
Mhm.
rather than just, you know, throw it in the trash can or, you know, drop it in the toilet and take a picture of it and say, this is what I think of this one.
Oh,
I don't think you've ever done that yet. I don't think you've ever quite done the, you know, Torpedo, it's been a good run.
it's kind of like,
Yeah.
how awkward is it when you don't give a good rating to a figure, but then you meet the person afterwards and you gotta think, it makes you think, did they see my review? It's kind of like when I went to JoeCon, like, how many of these people actually watched the show, hearing me talk about what yeah, that's right, you're right, 5 people watched it.
Yeah.
You know, you know, you know, but in fairness, when you review stuff, you know, by any means, I'm nowhere near the caliber of you two guys. You know, I've now called them hack reviews, as Fred has put it as. So when I do a review, I automatically said this is my hack review.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, you know, it's like you want to trash it, but you can't. And
Right.
it's like, but you want to be honest about it because you're the one who spent the money for it.
True.
You know, like,
There's been times where, and it's funny because 9 times out of 10, if I give something a nasty review, and this has happened before, and then I meet some of the people who were, you know, who worked to produce the figures at a con or something, and it comes up in conversation, and they will come out and say, you know, that wasn't my best work, or that wasn't the favorite thing I had to work on too, because they've got their own constraints. You know, they've got people above them saying, okay, this is what this figure needs to have. They've got, you know, Walmart saying, you know, this figure with a vaguely similar name didn't sell last year. I don't want, you know, you got to do something to make this one different or more exciting or whatever. There's all sorts of stories like that we wouldn't believe, but yeah, I mean, it's happened in the past, and then, you know, generally you'll find the designer kind of agrees with you that, yeah, that wasn't the best, but, you know, I did the best with what I had, or, you know, I didn't like working on that, but
it's kind of like, you know, when we did our little review of when me and Fred did the review of all the mock-ups for the next figure subscription, like,
Yep.
we totally said which ones was like the worst on the list. But the
Yep.
sad part is that we'll buy the whole damn set. You know, I mean, but of course, like, my opinion was, I think it was Windmill was the worst one. In my opinion, I'm like, what are you thinking giving us this, what was it, a Funko?
Funko.
Yeah.
Fun School, yeah.
Fun School.
Fun School.
Yeah.
Fun School. What are you doing gives us Fun School?
Peller.
Who wants Fun School? You know, and then you're thinking back in your head, probably someone who works at the club wanted that one themselves. I don't know.
yeah.
But it's
Who
not
knows?
like, you know, but I mean, it's all fairness. We can all have our reviews, but in the long run, they got their money out of us. You
It's
know,
true.
I mean, we already purchased the item. It's not like there's a clause that says, if you don't like our item, you can send it back to us after we do a review and trash us.
Right.
So-
Now, granted, some of the reviews I've done have not been, you know, there's been a couple that I'm like, what were you thinking? But,
You know,
nothing of that magnitude.
And, you know, we've seen in the past where Hasbro would release something like the 25th anniversary Viper with the weird wrists. And then in a subsequent re-release, you know, for the box set, it was corrected. So have you ever found as a reviewer where feedback that you have offered may have led to positive, you know, and I mean, constructive feedback, not like, you know, Hasbro, we need an entire wave of hit and run. But you know, have you found have you ever seen where feedback that you've offered in a review may have possibly led to a rethinking or an alteration to something down the road?
I don't know. That's tough to say. I mean, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, the only thing I can think of, which wasn't just me, but it was kind of the community, was the whole figure subscription service hit and run situation where his skin was more flesh colored, and there was kind of an outcry over that, and they ended up changing it into more green.
Salvo.
But beyond that, I mean, well, Salvo was another one, exactly. Yep. But I can't think of anything directly where I had a really specific issue with a review and the figure came out a little bit different the next time, and somebody actually came up to me and said, you know, it's because of your feedback that this happened, you know. So I can't think of anything really off the top of my head.
Okay, well, I want to give one more question, and then we'll get off the review topic for a bit, because Justin's like, enough with the reviews already. But like, for those people out there who have never done a review before, who just go to the websites and they see these pictures and they see, you know, the lighting and all, can you describe a little bit of like what your process is? What goes into constructing a review that is eventually posted?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's not as hard now as it used to be.
Yeah.
At least not for me on General's Joe's, because they've got all these web tools these days, you know, WordPress and online galleries and stuff like that, where we're collecting a bunch of images together and posting them online. It's a hell of a lot easier now than it used to be. I remember when I was covering JoeCon for Joe sightings back in the day, I had to fire up Dreamweaver and do some convoluted, you know, series of commands to take a bunch of images and rotate them and convert them and make a gallery out of them and make some strange static HTML. And it was just took hours and hours and hours. And so, yeah, essentially what I'll try to do is when I get a figure, the first thing I try to do before I do anything else, because I'm antsy and I want to open it. You know, if I'm going to be taking packaged pictures, like the minute I get it out of the box, I'll try to throw it on my little, I don't really have a light box. I have kind of like this cloth backdrop with construction lighting surrounding it. Some ideas that I actually got from Fred as far as lighting sources go, and take the packaged pictures pretty much immediately, because I know if I don't take them right off the bat, I'm going to start pacing and, you know, getting all antsy and wanting to open them. So I get those done and out of the way. And then I take an X-Acto and I try to open up the package as neatly as I can. I always sort the figure. The first thing I do when I open them is I take any extraneous, you know, web gear, weapons, all that stuff off, kind of separate it off to the side. Do that for each figure in the assortment, so I can take, you know, the forward and back pictures, the unequipped figure pictures, and then line the accessories out and take the accessory pictures, and then put them all together, put them on the stand and take the geared up pictures, and then I start taking the actual review pictures. And by this time, I've probably spent, you know, 2 hours on one particular review just taking pictures. Then I gather the pictures together. There's a couple ways I can do it. I either throw them in Photoshop, or I've actually got an online app called Aviary, where if I have a bunch of photos on my phone or on my tablet, I can kind of crop them and do it right in Aviary. So I will use some kind of software to rotate and crop and resize a little bit. A directory, rename them, get them all organized. And then I do the actual writing. By this point, you might be talking about 3 or 4 hours, because sometimes, depending on how many pictures you take, you know, rotating and cropping could take a while. Again, not quite as long now as they used to, but it used to be a pretty long and arduous process. And then you do the writing, and it generally takes me probably about half an hour to 45 minutes to write the text of a review. Then there's, you know, any links I want to do. You know, if I do convention reviews, then you start talking about putting tables in the reviews that link to the other reviews in the same series and doing stuff like that, and then posting it on WordPress. So I would say, you know, from start to finish, each review probably takes me a good 5 hours to do. So you can appreciate, you know, even figure subscription service, and you get 12 figures at 5 hours a pop. You're talking about 60 hours for that one series of figures. So it's not inconsequential. There's a lot of work that goes into doing it. And then, you know, if you want to take comparison pictures, in my personal case, you know, I don't have every single one of my figures within arm's reach. If I want to take, you know, a comparison picture between, you know, FSS Raptor and my 87 Raptor, I might need to go out to my garage and climb a ladder and get up on my attic and go to my storage drawer, pull out my 87 Raptor, climb down off the ladder, come back in. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into it. And that's really kind of the framework behind the review. It's not just ripping something open, throwing it on a light box, and snapping, you know, 20 pictures and being done. I'm kind of meticulous about the way I frame them and the way I do them. So it can take a little while.
And what percentage of the photos would you say that you shoot that you end up actually using?
Oh God, I probably use 40% of the photos I take. If that, I probably take, you know, 100, 120 pictures per review, and I end up using maybe about 20 of them, maybe 30 probably is closer. So yeah, it's probably about 25% of them.
Okay, I kind of wanted to ask this because I didn't think a lot of people out there really knew all the effort that goes into putting one of these together, and I think that there's something to be appreciated in that, because as fans, you know, something new comes out. Why the heck haven't they reviewed it yet?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, okay. And I want everyone to remember, he has a full-time job. This is not his
so
job.
do Yeah.
What? I'm actually at my office right now because the internet.
I kind of figured. I see all those like social media icons above your door back there. I figured you got to be at work somewhere.
Do you see the one that I hid in there? Look
yeah,
right
I like
above
that.
my.
I don't know what social media account that belongs to, but
we were our company president. This is a total aside, but was in here one day, and we had put all these up. But on the far end of the wall, we also have the Ghostbusters logo, and
nice.
it's next to the Snapchat. And he was going through, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I think I've used all these." He looked at the AT logo, and was like, "Yeah, I'm on that one quite a bit." We walked out. We're like, "Seriously." And my
That's
office
awesome.
mate is not a Joe guy, so he's like, "Is that one of your toy things?" I'm like, "Shut up!" And yes, it is.
That's great.
I had some questions on the internet on the live chat. Chris, he asked if we were all in basements, and then he wanted to know who had the biggest basement. And I think Fred beats us on that because I've seen pictures of Fred's basement. I think it is bigger than mine.
I don't know, dude. I picture Justin is in like this like Fort Knox, James Bond, Goldfinger-esque vault where there's little men in uniforms like carrying his figures around, you know.
Mine's not all that hot. Or at least my office. It's not huge, but this is just one room in my basement. I got about 4 or 5 other rooms too, but they're not all mine, so I can't claim them all.
Chris, to your question, AT is a venture team.
Okay, so I kind of want to transition now because General's Joe's, especially before the news days, so before the WordPress days, was known for reviews.
Yep.
But it was also known for something else that Justin used to catch a lot of flack from me about, even because I wanted to know when the next one was coming. And that was Dio Stories.
Yeah.
And Dio Stories, I think, have kind of died down from the fever pitch that they were at, and not just with yours, I mean with everybody's.
Right.
But can you talk a little bit about like the Dio story, like what got you into it? How did you go about, you know, just free, you know, totally freestyle about this a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ever since I was 8, 9 years old, I wanted to draw comics. First of all, you know, I was dying. You know, the first limited series I got was Marvel Comics, like Hawkeye, back in the 80s, and I loved it and immediately fell in love and became a fan of Captain America and Spider-Man and the X-Men, and so I wanted to draw comics. And I actually, when I first went to college, I actually majored in art with the plan to try to draw comics, but realized that wasn't working out too well for me, so I shifted to writing, which I thought was a little bit more of my forte than the actual art. But I still really, really wanted to work in comics, to the point where I was writing stories and stuff like that in, you know, even before I went to college and discovered that I didn't want to be an art major. I was writing all sorts of stories on my old Apple II computer. I happened to live near Dartmouth College and would sneak into their computer lab over the weekend, and I would write, you know, X-Men stories and G.I. Joe stories and things like that. And it was just, you know, I just loved telling adventures with these characters, and I kind of started creating my own G.I. Joe universe in the mid to late 80s. I think it was the 1990 series that came out that actually had a lot of the new characters in it. So I was kind of piqued my interest and said, well, why are there all these new characters? What happened to all these old characters? And kind of created this story in my mind where they branched off a little bit. And so that's where kind of the kernels of these stories came through. And then I mentioned living in Springfield, Mass, when my wife was going to law school. I actually ended up working at the post office during that time. And the shift I was working was from 6 p.m. to 2 in the morning. My wife was going to law school all day. So I would actually wake up in the morning and I would write. And I would write G.I. Joe stories because I had just gotten back into kind of the G.I. Joe fandom. And at that time, you know, there was no comics going on. There was no cartoons going on. The story was essentially open. You know, as far as you knew, you know, they folded the flag. You know, Snake Eyes helped fold the flag in the final issue of G.I. Joe: Real American Hero. Devil's Due was not even known at that point. It was an open end. You could do whatever you wanted. So I was writing stories, you know, picking up where that left off and kind of creating my own universe out of it. And but still in the back of my mind, there was that little, I want to be a comic artist, you know, kind of thing digging around in me, even though, you know, it's kind of tough to be a comic artist when you can't draw. So that's a small piece of being an artist.
That's kind of the main component you have to have.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I had gotten back into the G.I. Joe fandom. I was writing this book called The Price of Peace, and ended up finishing that. And then did a follow-up to it and was really enjoying that. People seemed to enjoy reading it, and I was like, yeah, this is really cool. I'm having fun with this, and yada, yada, yada. And as I mentioned, I was hanging out at a place called the Bivouac, which was primarily custom figures, but there's a guy on the Bivouac named Tim who started doing something called a Dio story. He wasn't the first one to do Dio stories. I think there was a couple other people, and there's a place called Extensive Enterprises that did kind of more of a humor-oriented Dio story, but they did do one. But Tim did this story called Iconoclasts, which completely blew me away. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, he's taking G.I. Joe figures, and he's a comic artist with action figures. This is perfect because I can be a comic artist and I don't have to draw. I mean, that's how I can express this need to do what I want to do without actually having to draw. Thinking also in the back of my head, well, geez, it'll probably be a lot less work to take pictures of action figures too. And yeah, that's not true, but but that's kind of what formed it. And then I actually did a tiny kind of test Dio story when I did those first reviews for the Real American Hero Collection stuff. Really had a great time with it. So I decided, well, my written stuff is, I kind of wrapped up my written story. Well, why don't I pick up where that left off, only do it in a Dio story format? And that's what I started to do. And some of the early stuff, my first Dio story was called Power Struggle, and that was released, I think, in the very early 2000s, if I remember right. I'm trying to remember what figures I used for that particular story. But I know the opening scene had a bunch of Eco Warriors and Ed Zartan, and I don't remember exactly where that went, but I had some custom figures in there. But yeah, it was kind of the first one I did. And some of it was awful. I mean, the original laboratory set was pieces of white wood screwed together with some printed out kind of faux tech pieces folded together and taped, and you could see the seams of the Scotch tape. And the special effects were basically Photoshop brushes of yellow, just like dab, dab, dab to make it look like gunfire. It was, I look back at it now and it looks ridiculous, but I really enjoyed doing it, and people seem to really enjoy reading it. A guy named Mike did G.I. Joe Warfare around that same time, which I kind of fed off these other guys. Like, Tim's Iconoclast was so great, I kind of fed off him, and then G.I. Joe Warfare was so great, I fed off him. And then there was, of course, Eric, a guy named Eric, did this fantastic from Cooper the Inner Sanctum, did this absolutely magnificent Dio story where it was just, I look back and it still blows whatever I've done away. I actually had the fortune to visit his basement at one point and kind of see what actually went into him shooting those things. And he had like different colored lights, and he had these things draped over to kind of give it atmosphere. And he had the whole USS Flag in there. He had built a whole set of the Cobra prison compound. I mean, he had kind of really taken these little kernels of ideas and gone completely crazy with them, and kind of he's what spurred me into getting more involved and doing more elaborate sets down the road. So of course Power Struggle kind of went into, I think Loose Ends might have been after Power Struggle, and then there was Concrete Jungle, and I tried to explore different parts of the G.I. Joe mythology that I really loved that some other people didn't in each one of those stories. Like Concrete Jungle was all about the DEF and kind of the urban guys, and because I really loved like Gristle and Mace and some of these late 90s figures that didn't really get a lot of the credit they deserved. So I showcased a lot of them. And then of course, Devil's Due started coming out and doing their stuff. And that's when it got a little weird, because this was filling a great gap for me, and I think for others, in that it was continuing this G.I. Joe story in a way that I enjoyed. But then you had Devil's Due, who was officially continuing the G.I. Joe story. They had Hasbro's blessing, so in our mind back then they were the real deal. So it was kind of interesting, writing in parallel to that and trying not to mimic some of what they were doing. In some ways I did kind of mimic, when they killed off a character, sometimes I did too. But beyond that, it was still kind of continuing to tell my own story, and it really creatively, it gave me a fantastic outlet. It's something that I absolutely loved. At the peak of it, I loved doing it and had so much fun, and really it helped me express kind of my creative side, do some things with G.I. Joe that you know, I didn't really feel like Hasbro was doing or other people were doing. And you know, kind of feels like it's interesting now because a lot of the stuff that the G.I. Joe Club is releasing, their figure subscription service, you know, I don't want to take too much credit for it, but I feel like it dovetails nicely with some of the stories I was telling, even if it's not necessarily inspired by stories I was telling. You know, we've got Viper as a figure, we've got Hit and Run playing a pretty big role in their little universe. So it's always been kind of why I've loved a lot of the G.I. Joe Collectors Club stuff, just because it really tends to align nicely with the universe that I created as well, and we seem to be on similar wavelengths as far as that goes.
And you did, if I remember, for the newsletters, you did a Dio story for them, which is sadly no longer published anywhere because the club at one point used to have their newsletters online. Right. And
yeah, I did 3 years worth. I can't even believe it looking back at it now, but yeah, there was 3 full years worth of Dio stories that I did for the club, 3 different 12-issue installments, which was both amazing and frustrating. It wasn't frustrating because of anything that the club gave me relatively free reign to do what I want to do, which is really awesome. But you quickly learn that designing a Dio story to be produced solely on the web and designing a Dio story that's going to be published in a comic book format in paper are really, really different animals. And it was really tough originally for me to kind of get my head around what I had to do differently for the newsletter compared to what I was doing on my website. But once I did, I kind of felt like I got into the groove and did some pretty fun stuff. And I should actually talk to the club because I think somewhere I've got all those comics in digital format. And I would love to make them available because I'm really proud of a lot of that work that I did. I went out of my way to include a lot of the club characters and a lot of the club figures, but in a way that still made some sense. And, you know, I had a really awesome Star Brigade story that I thought was really, really cool that came out pretty well. And some stories that are a little bit different than your normal main G.I. Joe stories that had a lot of their characters and a lot of their influence.
Well, and you were someone who poked in your Dio stories. You poked and dug up the characters that weren't necessary. Your Dio stories didn't focus solely on Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Flint, Lady J. You know, Hit and Run, Vipera, the Interrogator. You know, Colonel. I'm going to say it. I like Colonel Courage solely because of the scenes you got of him in the Mobile Command Center. I'm not going to lie. That's where I gained an appreciation because I'm sitting there and, you know, this was one I have no illusions of ever trying a Dio story because I just was like, God, I wouldn't know where to start. And so I was one of the people that every week was like, did he publish a new update yet? No. And then Justin would get an email like, when's it coming out? You know, because I'm like tapping the vein. When you did a Dio story, did you go so far as to storyboard it, or did you literally just kind of write the outline and then you got down with the camera and you know, was it more of the Larry Hama style where you kind of took it more free form, or was it a very structured, you know, storyboarded, plotted out shot for shot?
If this makes any sense whatsoever, which it may not, it was actually both. I created a very structured script where I actually said, frame 1, this happens, this guy says this guy says, because that's, when you're doing a Dio story, that's exceptionally important because you have to stage figures. And yes, you have to do that obviously as a regular artist too, but it feels like there's a little bit more flexibility when you're doing artwork. You can kind of decide where figures are going to be. But, you know, for me, I had to stage an entire scene where if you know, Cobra Commando is going to talk to Storm Shadow here and then they're going to end up over here, you know, that progression has to make sense. So I would write a very structured script. But then I often found, and this is going to sound ridiculous coming from a 43-year-old guy, but I would find that when taking pictures, I kind of get into the spirit of, you know, playing with the action figures, and the flow that was written down wouldn't work right. So I would ad-lib and improvise and end up with a different end result than I had written down on the page, but I certainly used the page kind of as my template. So it was a little bit of both. It was a structured script, but I ended up doing quite a bit of freestyling as well, kind of whatever felt natural at the time.
You concluded your Dio story universe, at least the last chapter of it. You concluded it with, you know, kind of one of those mother of all battles, you know, and man, there just a lot of stuff happened, and you ended it on a cliffhanger, jerk. But is this something that now you've been away from it for a few years, and you know you're older, you're wiser? Is this something that people could ever look to see a return to from you, or do you think the age of the Dio story, in general, has kind of been played out?
It's tough. I will say for me personally, I don't see a way that I just have the time and resources to do another one. I would love to do it. You know, if God willing, I won the Powerball and I could stay home for 7 hours a day instead of working, and have infinite money to go to Home Depot and buy all the set supplies and all that stuff, I would do it in a second. But I mean, just that final battle scene that you're talking about in that final story cost me probably $300 in building supplies, and you know, I don't want probably 3 weeks worth of shooting and Photoshop time just for that like chapter or two of the Dio story. So I just don't see where I have the resources to do that at this point. And to be honest, you know, I don't see a lot of other people kind of stepping up to it either. It's always tougher to create fiction, number one, when there is ongoing fiction already happening. That was a big boon for Dio stories back in the day, is that there wasn't a comic or anything like that going on, so you really had free reign. Number two, it's just there's a certain level of time that you have to take in order to do it and do it right. Plus, you know, there's so many outlets for creativity these days. You know, YouTube, anything you want to do, stuff like that. You know, that taking a camera and getting down in the grass, taking pictures of the action figures and posting them doesn't come up so much, you know, or somebody will just as well shoot a single shot and put it on Instagram rather than doing a full-blown Dio story. I mean, that's kind of where, you know, the desire right now is so much more instant gratification. Somebody would rather spend, you know, 2 hours framing a single shot and filtering a single shot to put on Instagram than taking, you know, 20 pictures and crafting a actual comic book story out of it. So yeah, it's tough. I don't know if there's going to be a whole lot more in the whole Dio story mythology from here. I mean, there is some stuff. If you go around to the aforementioned Instagram, you'll sometimes find links to like Marvel Comics Dio stories of a sort and things like that. And certainly action figures are more well articulated and better built than they've been in a long time that lend themselves to that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. So many stories have been told for G.I. Joe at this point. I'm just not sure that folks out in the community really have it in them to do another story in that same framework.
Well, and again, to touch on something you said about, you know, having all the time in the world and winning the Powerball, you know, our fandom is aging. And, you know, we are shifting, and, you know, people are having children and jobs and mortgages and more. They're getting, they have a lot more draws on their time. Whereas,
you're saying we're adulting is what you're trying to say.
Oh God, I hate that so very much. But yes, that's exactly it. Is, you know, when Justin, you know, I consider Justin one of the last standing of the, you know, the online A Real American Hero guard. You know, if you think about the guys that were around when you started, and then even when I got into it, you know, there aren't many left. And
no,
you know,
they're still out there, but they're certainly not as visible as they used to be.
Yeah, they've aged, they moved on. Things, you know, they don't have that time to devote.
Right.
As
That's
much
the big
to
thing.
this.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to. I had sent Justin an agenda kind of before we started with all this, some topics, and I'm going to skip a section right now because he touched on this, and I really want to highlight this part of it. Is for those of you who, again, have been living under a box, or, you know, have the really big basements that you're not leaving, to tie back to what we said earlier, Justin is not just involved in the G.I. Joe world anymore. He'd started, and, you know, Justin had published some Kindle Worlds pieces, originally G.I. Joe themed, and has broadened out further. So into original fiction, both in Kindle format and in printed format. Available on Amazon now. Seriously, look up his author page. Buy a book or two. Learn to read.
Damn right.
But so let's. I kind of want to start a little bit with the Kindle World stuff, and then transition into like price a piece in your own work. So, you mentioned, you know, when you started off with price a piece and all that, you know, and that was your original fiction. You published it on Kindle Worlds. So you took that, and that was, you know, you cleaned it up a bit, and that was, but that had already been written. Right. To some extent. And then along comes this little story called Welcome to Wolf Squad, which, you know, you kind of had the Hammer thing going where, you know, back in the days when Larry was working on the comic, Larry was told, here's a slew of characters that are coming out, find a way to work them in. And if you guys don't know what Welcome to Wolf Squad is, Mr. Bell took it upon himself to not do the last year of Toys R Us stuff, but it was the year before, if I remember correctly.
Right. I did do...
you did a second one called Nerves of Stone.
I did a second one. Yeah, I did a second one that features last year's stuff. But yeah, the Nerves of, or not Nerves of Stone, the Welcome to Wolf Squad was, well, it was inspired mostly by, I think John Violette was one of the designers, and he did an interview at Comic-Con, I believe, where he mentioned that, you know, some of these characters were part of this Wolf Squad. And for some reason, you know, for a brand that doesn't really have, or hasn't had in a long time, it used to back in the day, it hasn't in a long time had a really great cohesive mythology. I find myself really tied to trying to kind of create this mythology that ties this stuff together. And I love connective tissue kind of between cartoons and between action figures, or between comics and action figures. I think it's really important to have that cross-brand appeal where you see the same thing on store shelves as you watch on your television set, which is something that G.I. Joe has struggled with mightily, at least recently. So I really was inspired by the fact that these guys are part of Wolf Squad. Well, what the heck is Wolf Squad? Nobody knows what Wolf Squad is. So I kind of said, well, if nobody knows what Wolf Squad is, I'll say what I think it is and kind of tell the story. And it was really challenging to take that diverse group of characters that came out, I think it was in 2015, maybe.
I think so.
And really explore kind of what brought them together. And I tried to use every single character that was in the assortment and it really kind of threw me back to when I was doing those stories we talked about for the G.I. Joe Collectors Club, where you had to take all these different characters that they featured in their convention sets and stuff and find a way to tell a story where they all come together, and it doesn't sound too contrived. So that was really the inspiration for Wolf Squad. Not only that, but the fact that you could release, you know, shorter fiction. It didn't have to be something that was 130,000 words long. You know, you could just kind of throw something together pretty quickly. And you know, I'll be honest, I'm not gonna say it's made me a lot of money, but it's done pretty good for me. So you know, that's kind of what inspired me to Nerves of Stone the following year. And then we got to this year, and there isn't any characters to do stories based on, unfortunately. But yeah, that's kind of where that came from. And I'd love to maybe do another one if we get an opportunity to get some other figures out there that I might be able to tie together. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what inspired that. You know, when Kindle Worlds was first announced, I was like, oh, this is fantastic. You know, this is, you know, I've got stuff that I've already done. I've got stuff that I love to do. And I can actually make a little bit of money off it. There is still and again, it falls down to a matter of time. I've got this really kind of elaborate, intricate idea of some other Kindle World stuff that I'd like to do, which is like essentially a full year-long project, which I kind of sowed the seeds of a little bit with a previous work, but I kind of want to explore that a little bit further. But yeah, I have this whole thing, this whole like timelines story planned out, where the first story takes place in the Adventure Team days, and it kind of ties into the creation of the, you know, of the Real American Hero Team in the 80s. And then I'm trying to weave some Sunbow stuff into it. Then I'm also tying in some Renegades and Sigma 6 stuff into it. And I'm basically have this story. I've got it all sketched out. I just haven't written much of it yet. But the general idea is that it tries to take every single era of G.I. Joe and tie it together into one strange kind of. It's similar to what they're doing with First Strike and that kind of thing, where they're touching a lot of these touch points like Adventure Team and like, you know, Baron Ironblood and the Intruders and all this different stuff and trying to weave them together. So I've got that story kind of in my head. I just haven't gotten it down on paper. I'd love to do that at some point, but that's, but yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's been really, really fun, is to tell stories with these familiar characters and kind of get them out into the world, you know, where I don't have to just create static HTML pages and pop them up on a website and do it that way. So
as a writer, was did you find it, because you kind of touched on this, but I kind of want to expound on that. You mentioned, you know, trying to tie all the characters in a preconceived, you know, in a predetermined roster together. Mm-hmm. Is it more challenging for you to tell a story where someone says, "Hey, Justin, here are the 12 characters that and 4 vehicles that you need to use," or is it harder to be told, "Hey, Justin, here's a blank sheet of paper, no constraints, but we need both of these in the, you know, you have the same deadline"?
Yeah.
Which do you know, for your particular style of writing, which one is more challenging?
Blank page is 100% more challenging. I'd love to have that framework to go by. It gives me inspiration to kind of get an idea of who I have to work with. Now, if I have at the end of the day, if I take that blank page and turn it into something, I probably find that more rewarding than taking the 12 characters and building something with that. But as far as a challenge goes, I think it's much more challenging to do that with a blank sheet of paper than it is with, and that was one of the interesting lessons I learned kind of doing my own fiction, where it really was a blank piece of paper, where there's this whole other universe of preparation work that has to be done, of character development work, of backstory, of all this stuff that, you know, you don't just sit down and say, okay, this is my character, I'm going to write his story. You have to say, okay, this is my character. How did he get here? Mm-hmm. You know, what makes him do what he does? Where did he come from? You know, what are his relationships like? Because especially if you're doing a trilogy that takes, I mean, my first, you know, work of my own, the Operation Harvest trilogy, kind of took place, you know, it took me about 3 years to write the entire thing. So you have to have a good idea of your character motivations and what makes them who they are at the beginning, because yeah, they'll change probably over the trilogy by you know, events that happen within the book, but you got to have the same core character at the end that you have at the beginning. So you really have to understand that character at the beginning, because once you publish that first book, you can't unpublish it. So you can't tell this story of this character William Strickland in book 1, have him do certain things, and then by book 3 he's going completely against character because, oh, you know, it would be really cooler if he was like this instead. And then go back and say, oh, let's pretend book 1 didn't have. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So that really adds a lot of complexity to it. It's not a matter of sitting down and starting at page 1 and saying, this is the story I want to tell. It's a matter of sitting down first and filling up a notebook with who these characters are right up front, so you understand them before you can tell their story.
See, I like this, because I set up a transition. Justin just grabs the ball, hits it out, takes me right into the next section. I always, it's funny when you say Operation Harvest, it always jolts me, because I always think of it up as the title of the first book being the trilogy, which is Fog of Dreams. So again, for those people out there who don't know, the Fog of Dreams is this first book, and it's about this. He was NSA, I think is how you said it. Yeah. He was. I always get my acronyms confused.
Well, he was a contractor working for the NSA, yes. Kind of, which it's funny because you know, he does stuff for the NSA that, and you know, there's creative liberties. You know, the NSA is really kind of a bunch of computer nerds. They're not really field agents who do military operations, but you know, just pretend that in Justin universe, this is something they do.
It works, but Justin's trilogy was about an operator who he kind of finds himself on the sinister end of some genetic experimentation and this whole mystery about what happened to his family, who did this to him, and how does he get his life back. And when I read that, you know, you know, everybody, when you read a book, you always draw parallels to other things you've read. And for me, you know, there was it Nowhere Man? There was a television series about someone who waked up and he has no idea who he is. And I'm probably butchering the name of it, but tell us a little bit about, okay, so you've been writing, you know, you've been writing all this G.I. Joe stuff. You've immersed in this G.I. Joe universe. Okay. I'm not writing G.I. Joe now. You've probably, and I'm suspicious you've been writing your own non-Joe stuff all along and just not releasing it. But now, okay, I'm going to take this leap of faith. I'm going to dive in. G.I. Joe's over here. How the hell do you come up with the idea of NSA genetically induced lycanthropy? Which I'm not spoiling it. It's in the first book. And how do you come up with this merger of the sci-tech thriller storyline, and you know where did this inspiration come from, and what led you to write it?
It all comes back to G.I. Joe. I mean, a lot of the elements that are in Fog of Dreams and the future trilogies are elements that I've pulled from G.I. Joe, so to speak. You know, as I love a lot of the kind of 10-minute in the future science fiction stuff that G.I. Joe brought. You know, a lot of the, you know, real world military guys always bristle at some of this stuff, but to me, the epitome of what I loved about G.I. Joe was the Mega Marines. You know, these guys that were hardcore military soldiers, but they wore this powered armor that made them stronger, made them faster. You know, it was all about, even from the early comics days when I read about Captain America and the super soldier serum, this whole idea of getting, you know, enhanced abilities. And then, you know, speaking of, you know, a current movie, you know, Blade Runner, the way Philip Dick kind of told that Blade Runner story with the genetic enhancements and the artificial replicants and stuff like that who are stronger and faster than normal humans, that stuff has always really appealed to me. But I also had a real appeal for the military angle too. So basically what I did with Fog of Dreams was kind of combine the two, where they were using this genetic enhancement to make a soldier who was stronger, faster, and could survive in the wild for very long stretches of time, and then be triggered to, you know, attack his target or whatever when the time came. And the idea around it is that, and a lot of this was also inspired by, you know, the Jason Bourne series of books by Robert Ludlum and the films, of course, as well, where we have another, you know, kind of augmented operative who wakes up without knowing who he was and where he came from, and kind of has to find out his own story, so to speak. And that's kind of the same thing. I try to add some other twist to William Strickland by making him a family man. He's got a wife and he's got kids, and so that adds some extra inspiration for him to kind of try to find out where he's been. But you're kind of right. I mean, this has been a kernel that's been in the back of my mind for a long time, and I've known who these characters were for a while. I just hadn't really found a way to tell their story. And it's really good timing that we're talking about this now, because I don't know if everybody knows, but November is actually National Novel Writers Month. They call it NaNoWriMo. And during National Novel Writers Month in 2014 is where I actually completed the first draft of The Fog of Dreams. You know, I had published some of the stuff for Kindle Worlds. I was really starting to get motivated into writing, into generating my own fiction. And then I happened to stumble across this thing that you said, you know, we challenge you to write 50,000 words in a month, you know, and only 15% of the people succeed, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And of course, you know, me being who I am, I'm like, I take that as a personal attack, and, well, damn it, I'm going to be one of the 15%.
You can't finish this. Oh, you're damn right, I'm going to.
And yeah, and in that month of November of 2000, I think it was 2014, either 2013 or 2014, I think it was 14, I ended up writing 85,000 words in the month of November. And then had the story finished, I think, by mid-December of that year, and got kind of a rude awakening where I said, okay, I finished it. Now what the hell do I do? So I had this thing and this book that I was pretty happy with. You know, I wasn't thrilled with it, but it was pretty happy. You know, it's a first draft, so it's far from perfect. So I started poking around a little bit, doing some searches, you know, finding out, you know, how do you publish a book? What's the best way to go about it? And you find out that, you know, being an independent author isn't just about spewing out a bunch of words. There's a lot that goes with it. There's cover design, there's editing, there's proofreading. So I ended up having to kind of stumble my way through some of that. The first cover I ever used for it is one that I designed myself. Hours and hours and hours in Photoshop, and it didn't look too bad. I was relatively happy with it. Wasn't thrilled with it, but was relatively happy with it. And then it was, so I released, and I found an editor who was relatively affordable, but I thought would also give me a good balance of what I was looking for. She seemed to have a good pedigree, and so I got an editor, sent the editor my Word files, and I also happen to have a couple of friends in the G.I. Joe community who also run their own kind of independent publishing house, and they offered to look at the manuscript as well. So I sent it to them, and they gave me some feedback, which I incorporated into a second draft. Editor gave me some additional feedback, which I further incorporated into a kind of new second draft. Had this cover that I had designed myself, and threw it up on Amazon, and it certainly didn't sell gangbusters. It did okay, but it didn't knock anything out of the park. But I had a book. I was a published author, so I kind of took the opportunity to say, okay, this was a great first step. But this isn't over yet, and I started working on my second novel, which is a book called Loose Strands, and I took some of the kernels of the whole, as Fred mentioned, the lycanthropy storyline from book one, and I kind of twisted it around a little bit, added some technology to it. The evil corporation in the novel is a company called Gentech, which has specializes in both genetic engineering and technical advancement, and so they're starting to kind of combine those two universes a little bit and doing a combination of genetic enhancements with technical enhancements to make these operatives to try to sell to the United States government. But of course, the United States government isn't really thrilled with it after what happened in the events of the first book, and they're trying to kind of muzzle what happened there. So I kind of build upon that a little bit. And meanwhile, William Strickland is sort of a fugitive from justice at this point, and is kind of well known in the law enforcement community for what happened in book one. So he's trying to kind of stay undercover and introduce a couple other characters and things like that in the second book. And the second book actually took me less time to write than the first book did. But then I had another kind of conundrum, because then I had another cover design, and I really had absolutely no idea where to start. I was just like, I don't even know what to do. And it was right around NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writers Month in 2015. There was a gentleman on kind of their forums saying, special only for NaNoWriMo people, I'll just do you some covers for $60 a pop. And I was like, well, geez, I mean, wow, he's got to be better at it than I am. So I solicited his help in working on a cover for book two. And he sent me a template for book two, and I absolutely loved it so much. I said, okay, take that idea and do me one for book one too. So he did book one and book two. And then I actually was searching for an editor for book two, and again, found somebody doing a special thing for NaNoWriMo, and sent her the text of book two. And I was blown away by the response I got from her. No offense to my first editor, but the response I got from editor number two was amazing compared to some of the response I got from editor number one, who did fine. But anyway, I was a lot happier with the feedback and the interactive kind of back and forth with the second editor. So I loved her work so much that I also said, all right, well, I've got a first book. You want to take a crack at that? And just to make sure, the first editor kind of touched on all the right points, and she looked at it and said, needs a lot of work, and found some spots that I had missed and the first editor had missed, and not just small like typos. She was talking about like, well, look at the text you wrote in chapter 2 and the text you wrote in chapter 4. You're telling these stories as if a month has passed, but really it's only been like 3 days. There's some timeline issues here, so I had to really kind of tear apart the whole first half of the book and completely rewrite it to really match the timeline a little bit better. So that was kind of a hard lesson learned, and so I ended up re-releasing book one with the new cover and with the adjusted text based on the feedback from the second editor, then releasing book two. Again, moderate to negligible sales, but I was now a published author with 2 of my own books. So, and because this was going to be the Operation Harvest trilogy, I mean, what am I supposed to do besides write the 3rd book? So it can't be a trilogy with only 2 books. So I started writing the 3rd book, and I finished the 3rd book, I believe, in NaNoWriMo 2016, maybe. I finished like a 2nd or 3rd draft, I think, in 2016. I didn't finish I had finished the book prior to that, but I actually, finished it. It would have been November of last year. And that one was, and you learn as authors, you learn to write to word count. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, well, how many pages are your book? Well, I can't tell you how many pages, but I can tell you that book three's got 182,000 words. But so yeah, I mean, my 3rd book ended up being hugely long, and I actually ended up trimming out quite a bit of it. But it kind of rounds off the story, kind of finishes it all off, and to be honest, I think that the trilogy is probably one of my proudest things that I've ever put out there. It's not perfect. It's not a fantastic work of literary artistry or anything like that, but I think it's a hell of a lot of a fun read. I think the writing is technically pretty good. I had a blast doing it. I've heard a lot of good feedback from people who have read it. And people who like G.I. Joe, I think, there's tons of action, lots of military stuff, lots of genetic enhancements, science, technology. There's, anybody who likes the battle android troopers, there's some, artificially intelligent cybernetic, beings in book 3 that are designed as kind of the anti-genetic weapons that come into play. And it's just fun. I try not to take myself too seriously. I just had a blast with it. People are dying. It's pretty unpredictable. You don't really know how things are going to end. But I had so much fun with it, and I'm so proud of it. And I'm currently working with a couple of people now about possibly, as much as I love the covers for the 3 books, I have gotten some feedback that the covers seem kind of science fiction, and the story is more kind of, even with the genetic enhancements and stuff, is still more thriller territory. So I've been talking to a couple people about possibly dialing the covers down to more thriller-oriented looking stuff. We'll kind of see where that goes. But as a whole, I'm really proud of the work I've done with it. And I actually just finished a little prequel novella to that trilogy as well that I'm hoping to start, to get out there too, which is a shorter work of kind of a little adventure William Strickland had before the Operation Harvest trilogy, just because I've loved the characters so much. And I've even tossed around the idea of maybe, fast forwarding, 50 years and doing a story in the future, kind of in the same universe. I don't know if I'll get there or not, but yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of work, because like I said, being an independent author isn't just, typing on a computer. It's cover design, it's editing, it's not necessarily doing all that stuff yourself, but finding a qualified person to do it for prices that you can afford, which isn't easy. And then after that, it's getting eyes on it. I mean, that's something I still have not mastered. I really think that my original trilogy would do well if I could find an audience that knew about it and was willing to give it a try. I've been monkeying with different advertising techniques for going on 2 years now with very limited success. So that's something I'm still experimenting with today. And it's a real challenge. And that's one of the bigger challenges. I can sit down and write, 6 books a year probably, but being able to market them and sell them is something that I'm still really struggling with. So that's kind of the long and the short of it, more long than short at this point. But
well, and it's tricky because again, you had started off and you had done mostly G.I. Joe based, and as we know, that's not a huge pond,
Right.
So you left that and you went out into the ocean, and you know what I will say, no matter what, you still damn did it. And that is something to be celebrated there. I did want to come back as they've always said that you write what you know, and whether it's character habits, blah blah blah. But you're always or your mannerisms. How much of Justin Bell is there in William Strickland, and how much?
Well, let's see.
Because when I read it originally, there were moments where I'm like, hey. Is that? Am I projecting into this? Is this like his morning run? Like the jog in the morning. I mean, is that Justin's morning run? You know, how much of you is William Strickland? And vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously, you know, he's a lot more intense than I am, but he's, you know, a middle-aged guy with a shaved head and a goatee who likes to run in the mornings, got a wife and 2 kids. I mean, that's me in a nutshell right there. That's kind of where the similarities end, because, you know, obviously, you know, like I said, he's a lot more intense. He's quite a bit more damaged, I'd like to think, than I am. He's had some obviously totally different experiences than I have. He has a basement full of weapons, not action figures. So, but you know, there's some parallels there, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely did base a lot of who William Strickland is, kind of at least physically and some general mannerisms on myself. Because yeah, you write what you know, and I felt like as the first character that I kind of invented, I should create him based on some kind of familiar framework, so I don't, like I said before, so he doesn't become a totally different person by book 3 than he is in book 1. So yeah, there certainly is some elements of that in me, and his devotion to his family and stuff like this, what he would do for his kids and things. I like to think I pulled some of that from myself as well.
I mean, you talk to authors like Clive Cussler, and, you know, Dirk Pitt is pretty much young Clive Cussler, you know, and so I figured there was a fair amount of that in there. So for your next,
Clive Cussler is one of those guys that I've been hammering on as far as my cross-sell promotions, because he's actually, I think, one of the characters in one of his books, his last name is Bell.
Yes.
So I do a lot of, like, you know, thriller novel Bell searches, and that guy's name keeps on coming up. You know, like, Clive Cussler, get the hell out of here.
Well, those are the ones I think he's writing with. Is it with his son? I can't remember. I know the ones you're talking about. I've got a bunch of them. I haven't ever taken the plunge on them yet. But now, okay, so you did the military. You did the military thriller, near future, and then you did the second series. And so military thriller is here, but like before. Okay, so here's G.I. Joe, and I'm chucking that over here, and I'm doing something different.
Yeah,
you went in a different direction yet again.
I did. And I can't really explain why. It's interesting. I can explain why. There's, as an independent author, like I've said, you have to not just write a book, we have to try to sell it. I've been following a guy named Chris Fox for a while as an independent author, and kind of an author/entrepreneur who's done a lot of work around what he calls selling to markets, finding a market that might be more sales friendly than something you're currently working in. You know, analyzing gaps. You can do all this, like all these analytics with Amazon, with Kindle, and try to find where viewership is strong and where product amounts are weak, and try to find that cross junction. So you want to try to fill a need that readers have in a specific genre, to, you know, drive some sales. I mean, to make some money. And they've also, a lot of this writing to market stuff says, you know, shorter, more frequent releases will help kind of keep your name in circulation. So seeing that, and I'd had an idea of kind of a science fiction story I wanted to tell for a while, about, and talking about writing what you know, there's a lot of my eldest daughter kind of in this Bree Northstar character, who is the central character.
And this is the War of the Three Planets series. Sorry, Justin, just for those of you who don't know it, this is the War of the Three Planets. It is 4 books currently.
Yes.
Yes, 4 books. I'm doing this off the top of my head. Also still on Amazon. I'm impressed. So go ahead, dude.
Yeah, so what I did is I came up with an idea for a trilogy again, but instead of crafting it as a trilogy, I'm crafting it as 9 novellas, 9 like 25 to 30,000 word novellas, where they're not full-length novel works, but they're an okay length, something that'll take you a weekend or a week to get through. With the idea that if I can, rather than release 1 novel every few months, if I can release a novella every month, to kind of keep the new release flow going, then that might help kind of keep my name up in the lists and in the Amazon algorithms and stuff. And it hasn't been a monstrous success, but I've been enjoying the universe a lot more than I thought I would. So yeah, like you said, right now there's 4 books out. There's a collection that's got the first 3 books in the collection. I've got actually book 5 is almost back from the editor, so I'm hoping that'll be out probably early in November. Book 6 I just completed the rough draft on, and that's going to the editor next. So I'm hoping book 6 will be out in December. And then I'm hoping for NaNoWriMo this year to finish books 7 and 8. Which would be about 60,000 words worth. And because I'll be honest, I mean, science fiction, you know, I love science fiction. I love watching sci-fi movies. I like reading sci-fi books. Writing science fiction is exceedingly difficult. Writing science fiction well. And I honestly, I'm not sure how well I'm writing it because, you know, I gotten some feedback, not a lot of feedback, but I'm playing it pretty loose, to be honest with you. There's people who will write science fiction novels that will create an entire universe with its own currency, its own measurements, its own languages, its own everything. I'll be honest, I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I'm using a lot of familiar Earth terms in there, but you know, I'm having fun with it, and I'm trying to just make a kind of quick blast story that's got a lot of action, you know, some intrigue, you know, very quick, short, fun reads. I'm not trying to make it overly serious. The main character, you know, it's a teenage girl who stumbles upon this assassination attempt aboard a shuttle as she's essentially flying off to college. She manages to escape and suddenly finds that she's got these crazy abilities, and she was able to kind of hotwire this escape pod she's in and fight off this army of attackers and kind of zoom off into space and crash land on a planet, and manages to save herself in spite of being, you know, essentially an 18-year-old girl who's never fought a day in her life. So that's kind of the genesis of it, and who is she really, and how does she get these abilities, and who are all these alien races, and how are these planets, you know, coming to grips with the appearance of this person, and what is the conflict kind of shaping their area of the galaxy. And it's been fun, but you know, I'm ready to wrap it up. I think, you know, like I said, I'm hoping to finish books 7 and 8 next month. Then it'll be book 9, and I'll be done with it. And believe it or not, I've been writing some stuff in parallel, and I've actually got one more thriller complete that's potentially going to be released in 2018. I've got another thriller that's back from the editor that I've got to make some changes to that I'm also hoping to release in 2018. And I've started outlining a third thriller, that will hopefully also be out in 2018. They're not, and I'm trying something a little bit different here, where it's not a trilogy, but it's a shared universe, essentially, where I'm going to explore 3 different characters who live in the same world, who kind of live in the same basic area of the country. So we're leaving opportunities open for them to kind of dance in each other's backyards a little bit. But I'm still telling each story as a, you know, self-contained story. And the first one is called The 15th Victim, and I'm hoping to have that out early 2018. Duck Duck Goose is the second one, which I'm hoping to have out, you know, maybe mid 2018. Don't have a title yet for the third one. I haven't even started writing that one yet. But in the perfect world, I'd love to have those 3 books come out next year, and we'll kind of see how that all shakes out. But.
And you work a full-time job?
I do.
When?
I do.
Where? I mean, good Lord.
Justin doesn't sleep, Mike. Justin never sleeps.
Apparently not.
It's crazy. I don't know. I mean, I will. This guy Chris Fox I was talking about earlier, he's got this method where he tries to write 5,000 words a day, and I don't hit that by any stretch. But you know, I try to get a couple 2,000 to 3,000 words a day written. And these thrillers that I'm doing for next year, they're not 180,000 words like the third book of the Fog of Dreams or the Operation Harvest trilogy was. They're probably about 90,000 words, something like that. So it's a decent length, but I'm generally able to finish a first draft of these length novels in about 6 weeks. But yeah, it's staying up late at night, taking some lunch hours. You know, I happen to work in an area that has a really nice coffee place, and I'll cruise to the coffee place for lunch, and I'll just pop open my laptop and I'll bang out, you know, 1,500 words at lunch.
Wow.
over a nice cup of coffee. But I can't really, people ask me that all the time. I can't explain it, but I have a very hard time sitting still. Like if I'm kicking back and watching TV, I generally have a laptop on my lap and I'm doing stuff at the same time. It's just kind of the way I'm wired. I don't know. There's days I wish that I could just lay down and not feel guilty for not working on something, but that's not the way I'm built. So I've always got to have my fingers in something. So if I'm not working on a G.I. Joe website as much as I have been, it's because I'm writing these novels.
Where do you
instead.
see Justin Bell, the author, 10 years from now?
Oh, where do I see him, or where would I like to see him?
Either, no, I want like the where, I know you are goal driven. I know you.
I am.
So I want to know what 10 years from now, where would you like to be? Where does Justin Bell as an author want to be in 10 years?
I want to be an author. That's what I want to do full time. I want that to be my job. I don't want to try to figure out how I'm going to write 1,500 words at lunch. I don't want to stay up to midnight every night because I got to wait till the kids go to bed before I sit down and type. I'd like to do the writing full time, and I think I can. Give me 5 or 10 years, I think I can get there. But again, it's been tricky, especially with the marketing and the sales and stuff like that. I haven't mastered that yet, and that's really what I'm struggling with. And unfortunately, a lot of the experimentation costs money, so I can't just sit here and experiment endlessly until something works. You got to kind of really pick and choose and try to do the right thing. And I haven't found that right combination yet. There's been fits and starts where, I'll have a period of time where I sell, 40 books in a week, and something obviously worked really well, and the next week I'll sell nothing. And you just kind of be like, okay, so what happened, and trying to figure out what happened. And so, yeah, I mean, it's good. And I'll say, along with being an independent author, I'm reaching out to agents to see if there's anybody interested. I will say the 15th Victim actually got responses from 12 different agents, which I was pretty happy with. Unfortunately, none of them committed to it. But that just tells me that, I've got the framework of something good there. I mean, they certainly showed some interest in it. So I'm hoping I can spin that into a relatively successful independent work. But there's a guy out there right now named Mark Dawson, who I'm kind of following around like a little lost puppy dog, kind of trying to do what he does. And because he was in a similar situation where he wrote a few books and none of them really sold. Then he wrote a book with a character called John Milton, and just somehow hit pay dirt. And once he started hitting pay dirt, it just kind of escalated, and he's really found a way to work advertising for him. And now he's a full-time author. That's all he does. And he sells a million books a year. So, I'm obviously not setting my sights on 1 million books a year, but I'd like to be able to do this full time and be able to live comfortably doing it.
Very cool. Are there any, because we've been on for a little bit here, and Justin's an hour ahead of us, so we're cutting into his writing time tonight here.
That's all right. Are
there any other projects that you are working on right now that you would like to talk about? I mean, this is it's open mic night with Justin Bell. Sell yourself, man.
I mean, but the thing I will tell you to do first and foremost, I mean, if you do want to support what I'm doing and you want to hit up Amazon.com and just go to my author page and see what books interest you, that would be fantastic, because that's really what I'm working hardest on, is trying to become a successful independent author. But along with that, I'm also working on a couple other fantastic projects I'm very excited about. We just wrapped up the Eagle Force Returns Shattered Piece webcomic. That final installment was just released this past week. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm working with the folks from Fresh Monkey Fiction on a couple of other Eagle Force related items that should come out alongside the figures, which should be a lot of fun, I think. So I'm working on some of that stuff there. I'm also working on an RPG, a role-playing game for Marauder Gunrunners, which should be hitting Kickstarter, I'm thinking, within the next week or two, maybe a little bit longer, but it should be hitting Kickstarter shortly. And I'm doing a lot of written work for that, a lot of kind of world building, a lot of kind of campaign writing, different things like that. It's already been quite a bit of fun. This is one of those things, Fred, where you're talking about having a blank piece of paper. It's super challenging because, as you know, I mean, Marauder it's an action figure framework, but there's no characters really, so you've got to kind of take the pieces that you have and make it make sense. And it's been challenging, but it's been a lot of fun. So so that should be coming along shortly. So those are probably the biggest things I'm working on at the moment. You know, that stuff and just my own personal writing.
All right, Mike, do you have anything else you want to bend Justin's ear on? Because I've been rambling on like an idiot for about an hour.
No, I think we're good on that. I was going to list off a couple of things, newsworthy stuff before we signed off. Do you live on the East Coast? Where on the East Coast do you live at?
I'm in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Do you plan on going to JoeCon this year?
I'm certainly planning on it. Yep. Well,
just in case you didn't know, the hotel was sold out.
Yeah, I've got somebody who landed a room already, so I'm gonna split with him. So I think I'm all set.
Yeah, that's what I found out earlier, and I double checked while we were online that the dates available for JoeCon are sold out at the hotel, or the block is completely full. So
they'll add more.
Knowing it's going to be the last JoeCon, that's me knocking on wood. You know, it's supposed to happen. I don't know. Also, it was said earlier this week that Hasbro said it, or I can't remember where it came. It was on HIS on the front page that Paramount will continue doing G.I. Joe movies.
Yeah, they're not falling over to that Allspark Pictures division or whatever yet.
Yeah, which we kind of figured it's going to happen. And like, if you didn't go to JoeCon, that we're not getting no figures until the next movie, which will be movie figures. But then there's some other Kickstarter. I think we'll go into that next show. I'm hoping the next show, I know I've thrown this idea up with Fred, was I kind of want to talk about Facebook live auctions.
Oh, God, no. No, oh, boy. I am sick of them in my feed.
I know, right?
I am already
I've been getting
sick
invites
of them.
Like crazy to those things.
Hey guys, look! I'm selling this Mega Block Skeletor. Who give me 5? No, stop it.
It started off like really small, and then it's multiplied. Like every damn group is doing it.
There was some dude that was selling accessories the other night. I'm like, and I don't know who it was, and I apologize if you're the guy that was doing it, but. When you're holding up a rifle and I can see your hangnails more than I can see Scarlett's crossbow, just cut that shit out. Wear some gloves. Production values, people. And this is coming from this show. Yeah. Like, we got none. But
we don't. Also, Fred did a little something earlier today. He has pretty much organized my YouTube page, which is Autobot City Toys, and we do use it for just our G.I. Joe show. I would do different stuff outside of G.I. Joe. It would be Transformers reviews, hack reviews, and they all would go in order. And then, of course, the other shows I do, Galactic Gumbo, if Josh couldn't do them, he'd ask me to do the show on my channel, and I would. So you got Just Another G.I. Joe show, a hack review, Galactic Gumbo, our show a couple more times, another hack review. Then
you are killing my OCD. I'm telling you, you are killing my OCD. I looked at there, and it was just freaking chaos. God.
But Fred went in there. He's got it all lined up. Just Another G.I. Joe show, my hack reviews on G.I. Joe, hack reviews on Transformers, and Galactic Gumbo went somewhere else. I guess I couldn't find it.
Oh no, there's a playlist for it. I just didn't pin it.
Okay, well, I mean,
I feel like I'm like your mom, and I'm like coming in there like, Michael, we've got to tidy up your room now. I just turned into Mrs. Doubtfire there for a minute. What the hell?
And I do really appreciate Fred doing that, because we had someone mention how he was trying to catch up on the episodes, and I don't think they come in order. I mean, I know before Fred messed with it, I knew where everything was at, because I'd scroll right to it. Now you put it on a playlist, and it looks really good. It looks professional, like we are actually almost a professional podcast.
You just said professional on this show. They don't go in the same sentence. And again, we have Justin, who's being very quiet over here right now, because he's like, I feel like mom and dad are fighting, and I'm in the back seat of the car.
I've been on
and Justin
podcasts
comes
for a long
from
time.
What's on Joe Mind, which is like a very nicely produced podcast with editing and sound effects, and Gary in a control room pulling levers and switches going, no, the levels are too high, so
no, here what you see is what you get. We screw up, you see it.
At least there's no screen share.
Something to be said for that.
Just like when I can't do screen sharing.
What? Who said that?
Yeah, if it's just screen sharing, I go screen share. I'm like, first words out of my mouth is, can you see this? Yeah, we say, okay, we're good. And then last show was horrible. I don't know what happened. I could not get the video, the audio. What do you got, Fred? He's right.
I'm not saying anything.
Well, of course, now you write it down. You're going to hold it up in front of the screen.
Yes, I am. That's what I do.
It does it all the time.
I'm just saying, whenever you watch the show and Mike has issues, hashtag Mike Tech. Just remember that. 2 words.
You got some really nice handwriting, Fred, I got to say.
Woohoo! Block capitals because my cursive sucks. All right, guys. I think that's a wrap for tonight. We've been on for a lot. People have stuck with us late. Justin, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you guys for the invite. I appreciate it.
I owe you a beer. I owe you a beer at the last JoeCon, man.
Absolutely.
As everybody owes.
I will take you up on that.
And you've seen what he drinks out of. Like, this is water.
I know. It's going to cost you.
When I want free beers, I want this thing filled all the way. So I'll bring it with me to Chattanooga. So
what size is that?
I don't even know. My buddy JP actually made it. If you look at can you see the Thundercat symbol?
Oh, hell
on the end?
yeah. That's why I'm looking at it.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah, my buddy JP made that up. It's an awesome mug.
When I was in Europe, I got, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I got 1.5 liters of beer, and they served it to me in this mug that's actually a 2-liter mug. And I'm like, wow, sweet Jesus. Well, the other 0.5 liter is for the head. When they pour it, in Europe, beer pouring is such a science. They have little fill lines, and they know it's beautiful. Yep. I mean, it's like going to the promised land. So if Justin brings that, he's going to be an expensive
12 ounces of beer got me to right about there. So,
damn.
I guess maybe 24 ounces. That's about,
that's like a 32-ounce beer mug.
Something like that.
Hell yeah. Respect. You drink like Coors Light and Schlitz malt. Like, you drink cheap, right? Because I can get off of.
Oh, no.
I drink Coors Light. I drink Coors Light.
Not too huge. That was some Blue Moon pumpkin wheat. That was nothing fantastic, but it wasn't bad.
So again, Justin, thank you for coming on and showing us that the alcoholic nature of giving us some insight into your work and letting me stare at your Masters of the Universe figures in the background and the Transformers.
Sigma 6 over there too.
You son of a bitch. I mean, what?
I got a Hulk over my shoulder up there, but yeah, I got a little bit of everything here.
Again, we appreciate you coming on.
Yes, thank you very much.
If you ever want to come on and plug another project, holler. We are happy to have you back.
Definitely. I will do that.
Mike, I'll let you sign us out.
All right, everyone, you'll see us in 2 more weeks. And just so you know, we have just 3 more episodes left in this year, leading up to our 1-year anniversary episode will be on December the 2nd. And that will be our last episode this year. We'll take the rest of December off for the holiday. Spend time with our family if we want to, or hide out from our family. But we'll definitely have a 1-year anniversary special. We are working on a couple of very special guests. One locked in, another one we're waiting on a response. And we might even do like another hangout edition, late night edition, just for shits and giggles. But 3 episodes left this year, and we're having a good time at it, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. You can find me here and on Twitter as BotconFan1978. You can find Fred everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Joe Battle Lines, including Twitch.
Twitch?
Was it Twitch or Glitch?
No, I always say Google Plus, man. I'm one of
Google
the 7
Plus.
people still on Google Plus.
I thought it was 3, but okay.
No, 6.
Right.
One of them dropped.
Oh, damn it. And Justin, we didn't get your, where all can they find you at besides, General Joe's and all that? I mean,
I have an author page at justinbellauthor.com, which is where I kind of post all my latest author news. So there's that, and there's generalsjoes.com, and I have a Twitter feed at Wolf's Head Pub. My publishing company is called Wolf Said Publishing. Facebook, there's also Wolf Said Publishing Facebook page. So you can find out everything you need to know about my author stuff there.
Great. And again, we do appreciate you taking the time and energy to put up with both of us for a couple of hours. So
this is easy. Good stuff.
All right, go buy some books, kids.
Yep. Thanks for watching. See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys, very much.
And